My name is Mark, and I always believed I understood my world. It was simple, predictable. I live on a cul-de-sac called Maple Court, a place where even the weeds seem to grow on schedule. Every house looks like it was pulled straight from a glossy magazine. Every lawn is a flawless emerald carpet. Every neighbor is the embodiment of friendliness, complete with a blinding white smile and a tan that's just a little too perfect. I was always slightly out of place on this street. My lawn sometimes grew wild. My car wasn't always clean. I preferred watching rather than participating in the endless cycle of barbecues and HOA meetings. And then, 3 weeks ago, that perfect, mothball-scented symphony collapsed. It happened at exactly 3 in the morning. I was sitting by my bedroom window, gripping a mug of cold tea. Outside, the silence was oppressive, unnatural. Even the wind had stopped. The maple leaves didn't move at all, like they'd been painted onto the night. Then I heard it. Not the sound of an engine, but a low-frequency electrical hum that vibrated in my chest, as if some massive invisible transformer had suddenly come alive. Out of the darkness emerged a black van. No license plates, no headlights, yet it moved with absolute confidence, like it belonged to the night itself, gliding over the asphalt without a sound. The Millers stepped out of the van. There were 3 of them. The woman was tall and unnaturally thin, like she'd been cut out of cardboard. Her hair was jet black, and her black dress clung to her body as if it were woven from shadow. The man wore a perfectly fitted dark gray suit and moved with the precision of a clockwork mechanism. His shoulders were too broad, his posture impossibly straight, like a soldier on parade. And then there was the child. The child was the worst part. He looked about 7 or 8 years old, but there was no trace of childish curiosity in him. He stood at the end of the driveway, staring up at the dark windows of the house, his thin fingers clenched into tight fists, as if preparing for something extremely important. When they went inside, I felt a brief sense of relief, but it quickly curdled into unease. I never saw a moving truck. No furniture, no boxes, just 3 figures disappearing into an empty house. The next morning, when I stepped outside to grab the newspaper, I realized my anxiety had been justified. The air had changed. It was thick, heavy, saturated with a sharp, metallic smell. It wasn't the scent of fresh-cut grass or morning coffee. It smelled like burned silicon, ozone after a violent thunderstorm, and something faintly sweet and chemical, like formaldehyde. The odor was so strong my teeth ached, and the fine hairs on my arms stood on end from the static electricity that seemed to radiate from their house. Days passed, but I couldn't get the Millers out of my head. I became obsessed. The binoculars I normally used for birdwatching were now trained on house number 14 at all hours. Their behavior grew stranger by the day. The Millers never turned on normal lights. At night, their tightly drawn curtains glowed with a soft, unnatural violet pulse. The light would brighten and dim, like a massive invisible heart beating deep inside the house. If I stared at it too long, my eyes began to ache, and a dull, throbbing pain formed behind my temples. None of them ever went to work. They never mowed the lawn, even though it remained perfectly, aggressively green, as if it were feeding on something unnatural. They never collected their mail. The only time they left was in that same black van, which departed precisely at 9 p.m. and returned exactly 1 hour later, always unloading something heavy and gleaming from its interior. My dog, Buster, a golden retriever with a gentle temperament who loved everyone, became a bundle of nerves. Whenever he saw the Millers, he hid in the darkest corner of the basement, whining and shaking. The fur on his neck stood straight up, and his eyes filled with a raw, primal terror he couldn't explain. This wasn't just disliking new neighbors. This was instinctive revulsion toward something far beyond his understanding. One night, armed with my binoculars, I caught a glimpse through a second-floor kitchen window that had been left slightly open. Mrs. Miller stood beside an immaculate, gleaming table. She was wearing the same black dress as the night they arrived. No wrinkles, no dust, no signs of wear. She raised her hand to her face, and I nearly dropped the binoculars. Her fingers didn't bend at the joints. They were too long, too thin. They writhed like tentacles, extending and shortening according to some internal, inhuman logic. On the plate in front of her weren't vegetables or meat. There were stacks of old lithium batteries and a handful of faceted crystals that pulsed with a soft blue light. She picked them up one by one and slowly consumed them with a kind of quiet pleasure. With every bite, tiny blue sparks escaped her mouth, and even from a distance I could hear a faint electrical crackle. The neighbors were the most disturbing part. Mr. Henderson, our longtime HOA president, the man who used to raise hell over an extra inch of grass, had become unnaturally calm. His smile was wider now, but his eyes were empty, like glass buttons. He repeated the same phrases over and over. "Beautiful day, Mark. Isn't it wonderful that the Millers moved in?" His movements were too smooth, then suddenly too jerky, like someone was trying to operate an old marionette and forgetting certain motions. Mrs. Green, who once guarded her rose bushes like sacred ground, now sat on her porch for hours, staring at the sky. Her skin had taken on a dull, earthy tone, and when she spoke, her voice sounded like it was coming through water, slow and distorted. I started noticing that neighbors often went over to the Miller's house in the evenings for tea. I never saw them come back. Their cars always remained in their driveways. So where did they go? The hum became constant, a low-frequency vibration seeping through the walls of my house. It rattled my teeth, made me nauseous, and left a persistent metallic taste in my mouth, like I was licking a battery. My thoughts grew sluggish. My sleep fractured. I woke up screaming, unable to remember my dreams, only the icy terror they left behind. By the second week, I couldn't take it anymore. When the Miller's black van disappeared at exactly 9 p.m., adrenaline flooded my veins. I grabbed a flashlight, a crowbar from the garage, and climbed over the fence. The air in their yard wasn't just cold. It was dead, electrified. My arm hair stood on end. My skin prickled, and I felt a constant static buzz, like I was standing inside a massive power field. Each step on the perfectly trimmed lawn produced a strange synthetic rustle. The grass resisted under my feet, stiff and bristled, like wire. I crept to the basement window. It was painted over with thick, oily black paint, but one spot had peeled away, leaving a narrow slit into another world. I pressed my eye to the glass. What I saw made my heart collapse into itself. This wasn't a basement. It was a living machine, The entire space was filled with tangled pipes carrying fluorescent blue liquid that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. Tens of thousands of thin silver wires pierced directly into the concrete foundation, like the roots of some colossal technological plant. In the center stood enormous transparent vertical pods, incubators, and inside them were people. Mr. Henderson hung suspended inside one of them. His body was pale, almost translucent, wrapped in glowing filaments embedded in his skin. His eyes were wide open but empty. Through his flesh, I could see veins filled not with blood, but with golden, crackling energy. A thick fiber optic cable ran from his mouth into the ceiling, vanishing into the maze above. His frozen expression was both peaceful and unbearably sorrowful. Next to him was Mrs. Green. Thin silver tendrils protruded from her ears like antennae. Then I saw it. An empty pod, clean, pristine, with a small metal plaque attached. The name printed on it used the same sterile, machine-perfect font as our mailboxes. Mark Walker, subject number 4. Status: preparation. Behind me I heard a sound. Not footsteps, not a whisper, just a soft, wet thud, like raw meat hitting the ground. The air instantly grew colder. "Mark!" Mr. Miller's voice said right behind my head. I could feel his breath, smelling of ozone and burned plastic. "We knew your curiosity would bring you here. You are the most observant and the most valuable." I turned slowly. Mr. Miller stood in the faint light from the basement window. His human face began to glitch. The skin on his forehead rippled like a television screen losing signal. One half still wore that perfect suburban smile. The other half had no skin at all, only a complex structure of living silicon, pulsing fiber optics, and tiny, constantly rotating gears. His exposed eye glowed red, like an LED. Terror forced me to move. I ran for the fence, but the ground turned soft beneath me, like thick mud. Thin black tendrils burst from the grass, wrapping around my ankles. They were cold and slick, like living seaweed. I fell, my hands sinking into the stiff synthetic lawn. "Don't resist, Mark." A chorus of voices echoed, not from the Millers, but from the ground, the walls, the air itself. Henderson, Green, others. "We don't kill, we improve. Your planet is an inefficient energy node. You waste so much power on fear, grief, meaningless dreams. We are here to harvest, to turn your minds into fuel. This suburb is our first testing ground." More tendrils erupted around me. One wrapped tightly around my leg, sending a violent electrical surge through my body. My muscles locked. My right leg went numb. The Miller's child stepped forward. His small face split open vertically, like a shell, revealing a complex multi-lens optic where his mouth should have been. He emitted a low, vibrating tone, like an old modem. "Initiation of Mark Walker. Protocol 4. Begin scanning." The last thing I remember before I was completely paralyzed was the view of our perfect suburb from above. But it wasn't the sky above it. It was a vast, intricate pattern of glowing lines stretching from every house on Maple Court to house number 14. Our entire neighborhood wasn't just a street. It was a massive organic chip, and we were merely its components, its nutrient medium. They dragged me into the house. I couldn't resist. Every cell in my body screamed in pain, but the commands from my brain never reached my muscles. My body became nothing more than a sack of flesh. I watched as Mrs. Miller, in the kitchen, with the same unnatural, soulless smile, methodically packed my belongings into black bags. She did it with terrifying efficiency, as if erasing every trace of my existence, cleaning up the evidence for the next generation of unsuspecting victims. They lowered me into a cold, transparent tank. The gel was warm, viscous, and smelled of ozone, like after a powerful electrical discharge. When the liquid touched my skin, I felt a strange, deceptive bliss. My fear, my anger, my despair began to melt away, like sugar in water. They drained those first. I saw a thick fiber optic cable slowly descending toward my face, ready to enter my brain and extract everything that made me Mark. My consciousness began to break apart into bits, into individual files. I felt my childhood memories of my grandmother's house, my first kiss, the smell of Buster, all of it turning into cold, soulless data. But something inside me refused to surrender. A small, stubborn spark they hadn't anticipated. They took my fear, but they couldn't take my will, my rage. At the moment the tip of the cable touched my forehead, something malfunctioned in my brain. Not a software glitch, an emotional one. I couldn't move, but I was able to focus all my remaining will, all my hatred for them, into a single desperate impulse. I remembered Buster, remembered his yelping, his trembling, his animal terror, and I understood. My connection to him, it was stronger than their silicon tentacles. At the very instant the cable began to penetrate my mind, I felt a sharp, piercing blow. Not to me, to them. The house shook. The capsule I was in crackled. Sparks rained down from the ceiling, and the machine that was consuming my neighbors began emitting a shrill, grinding scream. It was Buster, my loyal dog, sitting in the basement, sensing my agony. He couldn't break through their barriers, but he managed to break something. He found a vulnerability, some kind of backdoor in their system. My bond with him, an emotional bond, proved stronger than their technology. He struck their server from the outside. The Millers screamed, not with human voices, but as a cacophony of distorted sounds, sirens, grinding metal, shrieking electronics. Their bodies began to jerk as if hit by a powerful electric shock. The cables embedded in their flesh glowed bright red, then burst, spraying thick, caustic black smoke. The Miller's child froze. Its head turned toward me, and the red lenses on its face began to flicker chaotically. Interference. Unknown source. Circuit disrupted. It stammered. That was enough for me. My mind, temporarily freed from their grip, began working furiously. I understood. They were a collective intelligence. They were strong when acting as one. But my human, individual impulse, multiplied by Buster's animal loyalty, caused a short circuit within them. I felt my hands move again. With effort, but they moved. I tore the cable from my forehead. The pain was unimaginable, but it was mine. It was real. I climbed out of the capsule. The gel streamed off my body, burning my skin. The Miller's machine convulsed. The capsules holding my neighbors dimmed. Their bodies grew even paler, but the sparks in their veins faded away. I ran out of the basement, then out of the house. The entire street was in chaos. Burst wires protruded from the ground. Thick black smoke poured from the Millers' houses, and their perfectly green lawn began to yellow and rot before my eyes. Buster sat by my fence, whimpering and trembling, but his eyes were full of relief. I fell to my knees, hugging him. He saved me. Several months passed. Maple Court was no longer perfect. The Millers' house burned to the ground. No one knows how it happened. The police found charred fragments of some strange, unidentifiable electronics in the basement, along with traces they said could belong to an animal. The neighbors who came back home from their visits to the Millers looked lost. Their eyes became conscious again, but they held deep, incurable trauma. They remembered but couldn't speak. I survived, but I am not the Mark I used to be. My consciousness has changed. Sometimes I feel my thoughts blending with Choosh. Others hear a faint electrical hum where none should exist. I've learned to live with it. I sold the house and left Maple Court. I know they didn't disappear completely. They're out there somewhere, in another perfect suburb, searching for new farms to harvest their crop. But now I know them. I know their weaknesses, and if I ever smell ozone again, if I ever see a headlightless van, I'll be ready. I'll know what to do, and I'll never be alone again. Buster is always by my side, and my mind, though altered, is now able to see beyond the perfect facade, beyond the false smile, into the very core of what hides in the shadow of the American dream. I sit by the window watching the night city. The world is full of mysteries, and not all of them want to be uncovered. But now I have an advantage. I feel them approaching. I feel their hum, and I am no longer afraid.